everyone. Greetings from wherever everyone is joining us from. I am Soumya and I handle the marketing for the business research company. And I would like to welcome all of you to today's webinar on competitive intelligence for strategy managers. And in our session today, presented by Oliver, the CEO of the business research company, we will be going through the parts of our ongoing competitive intelligence series and covering different roles in understanding how CI or competitive intelligence can be relevant for strategy managers in their application and the working and decision making plus strategizing in the longer run. Everybody, please join me in welcoming Oliver. Over to you now, Oliver.
Thank you, Soumya. Good morning or afternoon or evening to everybody, wherever you are. My name's Oliver Guirdham. I'm the, as Soumya says, CEO of TBRC. TBRC is the business research company. I shouldn't use the acronym. The business research company is a market research house, which has been running for about 15 years now, and we do all sorts of the type of intelligence that feeds into companies' strategies. So when they're building strategy job packs or go-to-market strategies, we feed in information. So it could be competitive information, it could be market size and growth information. That's a huge part of what we do. Do a lot of supplier intelligence and supply chain intelligence. We do some regulatory intelligence. We do a lot of customer intelligence and some consumer intelligence. So customer intelligence being more B2B customers, consumers being more B2C customers. We do more of the B2B, but we can do both. So we're an all-round market intelligence company, and prior to that I was working at Global Data, which is another big market intelligence company, and before that I was working at Ipsos, which is a big one of the biggest market research companies in the world. Back then I was actually doing the kind of front-end surveying, so I've done all different aspects of these roles. Can we move on to the next slide, please? So today we're talking about strategy, and we're talking to strategy managers or strategists. And we want to talk a bit about some of the challenges facing strategists today. So a lot of data, and often not enough clarity. AI is an incredible tool, but it is increasing content at a kind of exponential rate, potentially, even though AI, has some great capabilities in terms of analyzing things and clarifying things. It is even more content going into people's in trays. The rapid pace of technological change, I'm not sure whether technologic is a word, technological or technologic change, which is so everything changing quickly. AI being the most obvious and pressing example at the moment, but that and I think it's changing from being technological change affecting technology companies and maybe some other businesses, affecting technology companies, very rapidly, and other businesses slowly. I think other businesses are kind of catching up to the same to be affected in faster time by technological change. So companies, all types of corporations, and when those changes happen, strategies need to change, right? You need to absorb that information and change strategies, and therefore that's speeding up the pace of things. Your competitors are doing the same, so they're launching faster, so you need to react to that. Pressure to justify decisions. I think with deeper data, with further analysis, I think as it becomes easier and easier to put together a nice slide pack, hopefully people are questioning the reasoning behind decisions more carefully than they were when they were pleased just to sort of have decent data to look at and something to respond to. The expectation about how much support in information is going to be there for strategic decisions has increased. And so, yeah, strategy has always been making decisions with a level of uncertainty and trying to make the best educated guess about the best path forward. And as a challenge, some elements of it have become easier and some elements have become harder, and it remains a very challenging exercise. And today we're specifically talking about the competitive intelligence piece. So how does where does competitive fit in? The competitive information fit into building up a strategy, and also a bit about how you go about gathering that kind of competitive information to feed into your strategy. So if you think of your strategy being driven by all those things I was talking about, consumer information, consumer or customer information, market information, market growth information, supply chain, distribution networks, retail networks, regulation, all these different factors. Competitors are one of the key inputs of information that need to be absorbed. And today we're going to talk about ways of doing that. Next slide, please. So why does competitive intelligence matter to strategy managers? So monitoring the competition allows you to spot trends early. No company is at the front of the wave on everything, or very few. I think there have been a few historically who've seemed to be able to sort of generate all the ideas in an industry. You could say maybe Apple has done that at times, maybe Tesla perhaps, but most companies might be ahead of the curve in some things and behind the curve in others, right? And so monitoring of what your competitors are doing, make sure that you are seeing changes in what they're doing as quickly as possible. Also helps you to spot white spaces so you can see where none of your competitors seem to be playing. And then you need to go into a process of understanding why that is. Is that because that's a big opportunity, or is that because there's a reason why you shouldn't be doing that? Benchmark performance. I think this is a really important aspect. So to get an idea of how you and your organization is doing in relation to your competitors, and that allows you to build on your strengths and mitigate your weaknesses. So understand where you stand, and maybe you make some strategic decisions about that, saying, okay, this is where we're strong, we'll keep investing in that, and we'll accept the fact that we're not as strong in this area. Or maybe you feel that you have to adjust to those things. Identifying a strength or a weakness doesn't necessarily mean an automatic course of action, but it's information that you definitely need. and react to threats. I guess that's kind of we've kind of talked about that in a sense. So yeah, when you see signs from your competitors, either their growth, feedback from customers about your competitors, feedback from distributors, retailers, market share information changing, etc., then that alerts you to threats to your positioning and things that you may need to change in your strategy. And all of this really drives you to refine the kind of key levers of your strategy, the traditionally defined as the 4 Ps: product, price, promotion, and placement. Or the 7 Ps if you for service industries. So refining the key levers, strategic levers that you have, and then allocate, and then the next step behind that is allocating budgets to reflect those that strategy. Next slide, please. So how do we, what are the sort of types of competitive intelligence research that we can do? So essentially there are 2 key types. There's secondary and primary. It's pretty straightforward. And I've split secondary into two types: a sort of a big one-off assessment. And this may be purely secondary. It may often be a combination of secondary and primary research, where you're really taking a snapshot of the market. And I'll show you some examples in the case studies later on of these type of projects. But essentially, it's a sort of deep dive on your competitors, either strategic or or financial, and looking at their market share and their share of market, etc., and learning lessons from that, both from their successes and their failures. So, as I said, I'll talk in the case studies a bit more about the wide variety of those kind of projects. These can be, these can be very valuable, these type of deep dive projects, when you've got a big decision to make, when you're deciding whether to enter a market, when there's a stop go, when there's a financial decision to be made, or on a kind of periodic basis, maybe an annual or biannual, as in 2-yearly check on your competitive environment. These are not things that you can do continuously on a monthly basis, and they're things that people often utilize research houses to help with, because of the amount of effort involved and the skill set involved in doing this kind of deep dive assessment, and really monitoring, really looking deep into the competitive landscape, and also because of another couple of factors: the sort of the independence of those houses, and their ability potentially to speak to people and get information that other that in-house people can't. The other type of secondary CI research is the ongoing type, and this is much more sort of often tool driven. It's kind of what it's one of the main things that traditional competitive intelligence or market intelligence teams within big companies did, which is just monitoring what's going on day by day, week by week, at your competitors. And over the last probably 10 years, there's been a big move to to sort of automation in this area, to bringing on to a wide range of tools that can be used to suck in all this kind of ongoing information, to organize it into newsletters and regular updates, to give people alerts, all this kind of thing. So what in many companies was a weekly or monthly roundup produced by the market research or competitor, whatever it was called, team within the company, is now much more tool based. Either the team are using those tools, or the broader employee base, particularly the sales team, etc., and the strategy people have access directly to those tools. So it can be immediate direct signals from the companies themselves, like product launches, financial updates, official announcements, interviews by the senior management, market entry or exit announcements. So there's the first level, which is really what the kind of company is telling you about itself. Second level is what the company is telling you about itself, maybe somewhat inadvertently. So things like employee feedback on forums like LinkedIn or Glassdoor, those kind of things. Job advertisements, where are they creating new roles? Store checks, so where are their products placed or services placed, and how are they communicated, and how are those where available, what pricing information can be gathered from that. And then a third level of ongoing analysis is sort of sentiment analysis, so social media listening, share of voice, and this will give you a customer view and a more unofficial view of your competitors. And then there's sort of SEO, AIO, AI optimization analysis of how well their websites are performing and what ranking they're at and what their ranking is for different things, etc., which can give you a temperature on the performance of your competitor. So all these things can be monitored ongoing, and a whole range of tools such as Clue and others that can be used to do that. Or you can utilize a third party to do it as well. Next slide. The other main approach for gathering competitive intelligence is primary. So this is something that we do a huge amount of. Now, people often ask, like, how do you do competitive intelligence through in this way, through primary interviews? Surely people won't speak to you, etc. Well, we do a lot of it, as I said, and people do speak to you. You obviously you're not necessarily going in talking directly about their own company, but you ask them about the market, and there are a whole set of techniques which are used by CI professionals to get more information from these type of interviews. You also don't necessarily need to be speaking directly to the competitor companies alone. You can be speaking to people who've left those organizations, people who've interacted with them. One competitor will tell you about another competitor. So there are many ways in which that can be approached, and that's a huge driver of competitive intelligence, particularly sort of forward-looking intelligence, or more less publicly available competitive intelligence information. Then there's customer or surveys where you can speak to the customers of your competitors and understand, you know, how what the identification is of those competitors, how well they known they are, what their approval scores is, what the perception is, the price perception, etc. Then there's your sales team intelligence, so win-loss analysis, understanding why deals were won, why they were lost, and adjusting, with the potential to adjust that, and that's a really core source of competitive intelligence. Those are the people in your organization who are spending most time interacting with customers, and those customers are, if they're asking the right questions, those customers should be feeding back competitive intelligence to the sales team. And then there's more direct types of gathering information, like channel checks and observation, so literally going and looking at shops and things like that, or mystery shopping, speaking to your competitors and seeing what their service or support looks like. But for most companies, these the kind of direct competitor interviews and sales team information, particularly in the B2B space, and then periodic customer feedback is where they should be drawing the majority of their primary competitive intelligence. Next slide, please. Yeah, and how do we specifically go about a project? First of all, so this is on a kind of one-off competitive intelligence project. Really critical to define the questions, define the approach, which is, as I said, often a combination of primary and secondary. Almost all of our kind of custom research projects into competitors will have elements of both of those things, but then it's really critical is thinking about who you're going to speak to, what type of people have the kind of information that you need in order to answer your key questions. Is it the companies themselves? Is it the distributors? Who within the organizations? All that kind of information. There's a huge amount of help that you can get from AI now in these processes. So particularly, probably the most time-saving single thing is the transcription, but also helping you to brainstorm ideas for the interviews, helping you to identify the right people to target to interview, etc., find profiles, etc. So there are various ways that AI can help. Validation. So we normally go through a process at the end of a project like this where we would go back to some of the key people along with our experienced consultants to recheck the final findings and make sure that they're sensible and that we can justify them, and then we deliver them to the client, hopefully as decision ready output, so things that are answering those CIQs and therefore allowing the company to move forward with their strategy. Next slide, please. Yeah, I'm wondering whether I can. I was going to take a break at this point and see whether there's any questions, or Soumya, if you want to give any other updates.
Yes. So as of now, we do not have any questions in the chat. Anybody from the audience?
Yeah. Hi, Oliver. I have a question.
Hello.
How do you prioritize which competitive signals are worth acting on, especially when there is an overload of secondary data?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, and I think it's an ongoing question for people developing strategies from competitive intelligence. So it is a matter of balancing information from different sources and then weighing them according to the strength and the authority of those sources. I think one thing I would, as a rule of thumb, a high level point is to take input from your sales team particularly seriously, because they, as I said, are the people who are talking to your customers. They're the people who are really feeling it. There's a tendency to somewhat offset their feedback because it can be seen as people making excuses for not making sales, etc. But I think in successful companies, that feedback is taken very seriously and acted upon, because it's the best kind of ongoing way of picking up signals from the market about your competitive positioning. So why is primary critical as well as secondary in doing competitive intelligence? So I think it gives more depth, context, and motive behind things that are happening. It's good for local knowledge, how things really work at a local level rather than how they work in theory. Good for validation of information that you might have picked up from secondary or from AI searching, etc. Most importantly, it's non-public. So while in a project maybe 80% of the data might come from the public sources and from gathering things through AI, etc., the 20% that delivers 80% of the value will tend to come from the primary, because that's the stuff that other people don't have, and that's what gives you this, allows you to have a strategic edge on your competitors by having that information. And in that way, it reveals hidden opportunities. Examples might be, early signs of dissatisfaction from a distributor, pilot projects that companies are running that are not yet publicized. So you might speak to an intern who's been working on one of these pilot projects, or a former intern of one of your competitors. Operator frustrations, bottlenecks, unwritten rules in procurement. So yeah, again, picking up on these things within industries that are not necessarily written down, but which everybody who's experienced in those industries understands, and trying to draw those out and communicate them, and understand their implications, and then win-loss stories that your competitors won't publish. So it should say competitors there rather than customers, so that you can understand why they've won or lost, reasons people are giving for buying or not buying a product or service. Next slide. This is a quick update on a bit more depth on how we utilize AI in the process. So we use it to support ideation in the creation of the questions. It's only a support there because most of the questions are really driven by the customer and what they critically need to know for their strategy. But it can help formulate those and give another voice. Respondent sourcing and screening. So yeah, there are increasing tools that you can use on things like LinkedIn and other databases that help you to identify and reach out to potential respondents more efficiently, because that's a huge time take within these projects. AI transcription and summarization. I think we all know how what a lifesaver that is in the process of any project. We've all seen it on our Zoom calls, etc. And it works just as well for research interviews. One of the things that we do increasingly is pull all the data that we've gathered in a consulting project, be it interview transcripts, be it documents, be it our own ideas, and put them into a single kind of folder within a tool such as Notebook LM, and then run questions specifically against that data set through AI. And that allows you to interrogate all the information that you've found as a specific data set relating to the project more effectively, much faster and more effectively than the old process of kind of trawling through it, looking for quotes, looking for examples, looking for ideas, etc. And then obviously in terms of delivery, Canva, Power BI, in terms of presenting the data, presenting the conceptual graphics are extremely powerful and big time savers. Next slide, please. Moving on to that presentation part. Presentation and thinking through of the information that you've gathered in order to turn it from information into strategy. Some of the key conceptual frameworks that you'll be looking to use when you're looking at your competitors. So 4Ps benchmarking. So taking the key strategic levers, product, price, placement, etc., and benchmarking your competitors on each of those factors, I think is a very good, clear way to give a high level understanding of your competitive environment. BCG is a very good visual metric and makes you understand which competitors you need to be concerned about for what types of threats, etc., and which ones provide opportunities. So which, based on cross-referencing their size and their growth, etc. RIO analysis is going more into the fundamentals of your competitors and really trying to understand where they have competitive advantages and disadvantages based on their core capabilities, and that again can help you doing the same, comparing that with doing the same exercise for yourself allows you to get more clarity on where the strategic sweet spot may be for you. SWOT, I know is often sort of rather derided as a conceptual framework, but it still has strengths and is the most kind of obvious framework to keep updated on a specific competitor in a clear and understandable format that everybody knows, and potentially so that's useful as a shorthand. And then there's a forward-looking SWOT as well, which can be more strategic. And then value chain analysis, so looking at and we'll come back to this in one of the case studies in a minute, is not just benchmarking your competitors on the basis of their products or services or strategy, but right down into the details of how they're executing all the way through their value chain, is something that can create strategic opportunities, or can highlight strategic opportunities that you wouldn't find if you're just looking at the high level product analysis. Next slide. Yeah, I think this is pretty clear that there are lots of factors that drive the effectiveness of competitive intelligence, and I think these things, to some extent, have to be balanced. You can't have all of these things all of the time, but you need to prioritize what's most important at different points. So I think, depth research at these key decision-making points, timeliness of research on the ongoing kind of monitoring of your competitors, objectivity, to try and make sure that you've got real clarity on the objectivity of information when you're finalizing decisions, but not necessarily when you're picking up signals. Similar for accuracy. Readability, I guess, is important where you're trying to communicate the strategy to your internal clients and above you, and consistency, making, in terms of ensuring that there are a set of metrics that you're tracking consistently, so that you're able to see where change is occurring. Next slide, please. Okay, I'll take another quick break before I run through some case studies.
Looks like we do not have any questions right now, Oliver, but I wanted to add a couple of points given the insights that you have given us. So I just wanted to take a quick moment to build up one idea that came up repeatedly during the session or our series in general. And all of us understand that, we are now in an environment where AI has made access to information very easy, and market data, competitor updates, reports, and any other information is very fast, available to us very easily and faster than ever. But then there are people and companies that are seeking insights across industries or advantages in understanding the real gaps of the market and what exactly matters. Plus, they need information or people to validate those signals. And that's where I wanted to highlight that primary research or quality validated information from market intelligence agencies such as the Business Research Company comes into the play. And we work a lot to focus on combining large scale data with direct market validation through interviews. And like you mentioned, how people give out information using the CI techniques that we have on ground, and they talk about the market, not just the company. So, given those expert insights and on ground intelligence is what helps move from just information to decision making. And since we are also continuing this conversation and looking at cases and through the series that we have developed across webinars, I also wanted to bring up that we're doing webinars across technology with our tech expert and healthcare with our director in life sciences and healthcare. And then again, we will be continuing our series on competitive intelligence with Oliver. So there are different aspects to the series that we have and different type of series so that people can educate themselves to the right topics and whatever you resonate with today. So I would definitely encourage everyone in the session and everyone watching and hearing me right now to join those sessions as well. And with that, over to you, Oliver.
Thank you, Soumya. Yes, so I want to talk through a few examples. These are just showing you how these kind of deep dive competitive intelligence projects can work and can really add value. I'll actually skip this first one if that's all right, so we can move to the next slide. Yeah, so this was well-being products and services for high-earning professionals. So we had a company that was kind of equity backed. It was planning to launch a product and service mix, which was supposed to help people professionals. They were particularly focusing on legal professionals, I think accounting, things like that, professional services essentially, with well-being. And the first part of the study was more a potential customer research, but we then did this competitive research, understanding the competitive landscape, and it brought out, this is an example of showing where competitive research can not just bring out kind of benchmarking information or information on your performance or how you should maybe tweak things against your competitors, but broader lessons. So in this case, it really kind of showed up that the competitors were in fact struggling in this market, that most of them were, finding difficulties moving from a kind of free offering to a paid offering. Not many companies were successfully selling into corporates with these kind of services. They were coming up against objections like, oh, well-being for me is a gym membership, so companies were not feeling strong drivers or from their employees for these services. So when you go out and look at competitors, you find out things about your market as well as about your competitors. Next slide. Yeah, so this is an example of a really kind of in-depth competitor product study. So this is about point of source carbon dioxide capture devices. So it's something that's been covered quite widely in the news. These ways of reducing carbon emissions by trapping carbon as it's expelled from factories or from power plants, etc. And this was a really detailed study. I think, I can't remember how many interviews it was, but probably I think it was 30, 40 plus in-depth expert interviews that we did for the study. And it was really and really about finding technical details about the differentiation between different companies' products. So carbon capture efficiency, cost per ton, CO2 purity, energy consumption market metrics. So it was quite technical, and the result of it was that the client was able to identify some areas where it had more of a differentiator, more of a USP than it had previously realized, and was able to then go out and use that with its clients to highlight that in its marketing, etc., and to focus its strategy in that direction. Next slide. Yes, this one. So this was about gearboxes. I guess the main point here is that we were talking both to, so it was for a gearbox manufacturer, one of the big Japanese gearbox manufacturers, or heavy industry companies, but they're in the gearbox commercial aircraft gearbox market and looking to expand in it. But it sort of shows the way that competitive research can be combined with other things. So it was looking at competitive information about these gearbox manufacturers, but also looking at MROs, the people who do the repairs and the maintenance of these gearboxes, and getting their assessment as well, both on the company itself, the client itself, and their competitors. So competitor intelligence is often part of a more mixed type of research project. Next slide. Yeah, and then this one, I guess this in some ways this one should have been first, but this is an example of the kind of broad scope of competitive profiling that you can do, particularly at these kind of critical strategic moments. So the big go-to-market moments and when decisions are being made. So this was a fountain pen provider, or a company that was planning to launch into the fountain pen market, which you wouldn't think is a massive growth area, but it is actually quite an attractive market. And they wanted to they were looking over 49 countries. They wanted information on all the competitors in those countries, how big their market share is, what type they are, and then broken down even into accessories and all this kind of thing. So these benchmarking studies, these studies can be the real kind of footprint from which the initial go-to-market strategy is highly influenced by these kind of broad competitive snapshot studies. And this isn't something that you would necessarily do every month or even every year, and probably will take a couple of months to do. But if you're making the investment in a big go-to-market strategy, spending $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 on a project of this type to really get clarity on the competitive environment within the markets that you're about to enter, particularly in these kind of more niche and less well reported markets, is an investment worth making. Next slide. Yeah, I think that's it. I did see a question pop up in the chat.
Yes, we do have a question, and the question is, what do CEOs and boards usually expect from CI today that they didn't 5 years ago?
That's a good question. I think they probably expect more in terms of, I think, the gathering of the rapid and timely gathering of publicly available information has become, as people tend to say in these things, table stakes. The process for CI people, the process of gathering that was actually quite difficult and time consuming 10 years ago. And therefore just getting that stuff together and getting it in a newsletter and getting it in a presentation for the board, summarized and clear, was a value add, right? The board definitely now will feel that they probably could do that themselves almost, or at least they don't regard that as enough value add from the CI department, and therefore it is really having picked up on the customer voice, particularly through the sales team, and then periodically doing these deep dives that can drive big strategic decisions at the board level that they're expecting from CI professionals, I think.
We have more questions. We have one question from Tim. Does the business research company draw a distinction between strategic and tactical competitive intelligence?
Thanks, Tim. Yes, I think that is a critical consideration. So I think you could see within some of those projects that we were talking about that some of them would be strategic. So there was the one that went sort of deep into the value chain. I'm not sure I showed you that one actually, but it was to do with technology. It's for a big technology provider, and it's breaking down all this information about the supply chain of its competitors, and how much stock they're keeping, how quickly they're delivering, etc. So that, I think you would describe that as more tactical. I think a lot of the information that you would be gathering on through these tools that update continuously would be more tactical. They might be driving into things that you communicate as opposed to big strategy changes. And then these bigger projects where you're doing more deep dive, more intensive questioning, speaking, aiming to speak to your competitors and understand them in more depth, that would be driving more strategic intelligence.
We have more questions. In the AI era with information overloads, how does leadership level differentiate between a signal and a noise?
Well, I think you do need to have methodologies for weighing the quality of the information, the source of the information, how many, from what number of sources you've been getting the same signal, etc. And there are a number of frameworks that are available for that, and that's perhaps something I can bring up or look at in a future webinar or discussion. But yeah, there are ways of weighing those things. But I think as a top rule of thumb, I would say as well, primary primary information or secondary information that's been supported by primary, so things that are supported from numerous angles, from numerous different approaches, are really useful. So yes, something said by the sales team may be quite weak in itself, but if that then comes out in competitor interviews, then that's something quite different. And then if it's coming through in social media listening, it gets further supported. So it's a matter of the strength and the breadth of the signal, but there should be some way. And as I said, there are a number of different frameworks which are used for this, for highlighting the strength and the conviction of a finding, and that the competitive intelligence teams should be using that to communicate with the strategists so that they can understand how the strength of the signal that they're being told about. Any more questions?
Yes, we have another one. Yep, please continue.
Okay, sorry to interrupt. Hi, Oliver. I have a
Hello.
question. What are some early indicators of hidden competition or emerging threats that strategy managers often overlook?
I think I would go back to just to the thing I was saying about the salespeople, that quite often their inputs are overlooked because it's seen as excuse making, or they don't that they're not properly incentivized to give that information clearly. So I think those indicators are often sometimes can be dismissed, and then it really depends how well you've set up some kind of monitoring system, right? So they're not necessarily being overlooked, but if you don't have a good competitor monitoring system in place, which I think for a medium to large size company now is kind of really, I wouldn't say inexcusable, but it's something that they should be doing, because it's much easier to do than it used to be. Then you will be missing signals. So not necessarily overlooking them, but just never gathering them.
Thank you.
All right, we have another question from Tim over here. The question is, has TBRC developed any in-house conceptual CI frameworks which it offers off the shelf, or are they contained in its bespoke projects?
So I think, what do? We do within our reports, we do some benchmarking of the key competitors within each market. We do we certainly do market share analysis. We do and we do some forward-looking size and share analysis. Yeah, so there's a few frameworks that we utilize within our reports, and then a wider range that go into the custom research, our consulting services, which but they would tend to vary according to the project specifics.
All right, Tim, I hope that answers your question. These are the questions from everyone, Oliver, and if there are no more questions, we should conclude. Yes.
Great.
Thank
Thank
you
you very
much.
much, everybody. And yeah, look out for other webinars which are coming up shortly. Thanks,
Yes,
everybody.
thank you.